Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live today on a Friday afternoon. Today is October 18th and we have some games to break down from last night. We are going to be starting off with some MLB playoff action as we got one of the games of the year between the Yankees and the Guardians. Unbelievable comeback efforts really on both sides of this game down the stretch. We're going to be diving into that as well as where the NLCS series stands after back-to-back dominant wins from the Dodgers these past two nights. Is the Mets season over? We'll be diving into that and more. Then we are going to be talking about the Thursday night football matchup from last night between the Denver Broncos and the New Orleans Saints. Are the Broncos a legitimate playoff contender? We're going to be talking about that, assessing the play of both young quarterbacks of Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler from last night and more. So we're going to be diving into that. And then we are going to be looking ahead to the remainder of the Week 7 action in the NFL this upcoming weekend, talking about storylines and handing out our top 5 best bets against the spread this upcoming weekend. So you won't want to miss that. We're doing actually a great job up to this point in the year. 29-1 is our record, hoping to churn out another winning week, so you won't want to miss that. And then we are going to be finishing off the show with a conversation about San Antonio Spurs sensation Victor Wembanyama, and I specifically noticed some very interesting things in terms of the betting lines for him on a couple different awards that I want to discuss and just talk things out with where we are at with Wemby. So a whole lot to dive into today, but before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the chat and comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And then if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can either go to the super chat feature that is available on YouTube or go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a tip or donation along with a comment, your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. Last night in the MLB, we got ALCS and NLCS action, and it was crazy on both sides, more so specifically the ALCS in terms of the back and forth that we got out of that game and an unbelievable matchup between the Yankees and the Guardians. We got back and forth down the stretch. We got big time home runs on both sides, and it was the Guardians where it looked like their season was coming to an end in the bottom of the 9th inning. Now, of course, they wouldn't have been officially eliminated, but they were on the brink of going down 3-0 in the ALCS, and instead it was John Kenzie Noel, Big Christmas, going yard for the biggest home run of his career, certainly, and one of the biggest that we've seen in recent history, as long as especially the Guardians can continue to back that up from here on out. So it was in the 8th inning, at the top of the 8th inning, where the Guardians at that point up 3-1, and we saw few hitters go down. Then it was Juan Soto getting walked against, this is at this point Hunter Gaddis, one of the Guardians' best relief pitchers. He walks Soto to bring on Aaron Judge. Judge just the other night got a crack at Gaddis and ended up taking him yard then. So it was an easy decision for the Guardians to send in Emmanuel Clase, who was the best reliever in the major leagues this regular season. And he still does have a very, very bright future, but lights are a little bit bright for him possibly at this moment, where yet again he ends up getting taken yard. I think that he's now up to, I can fact check this here, but I think we're now looking at at least two, possibly three home runs allowed from Clase in these playoffs, which is so uncharacteristic of him. Throughout the regular season, allows not just the home run from Aaron Judge to tie this game, but then immediately after, Giancarlo Stanton taking him deep as well. That is 3 home runs in the past 4 outings for Emmanuel Clase. That is just something where at this point the Guardians need all the help that they can, and Clase, who has been as solid as they come for relievers, for Guardian players in general, and he's now at 3 home runs in the playoffs. He only allowed 2 the entire regular season, so I don't think that it's anything to too significantly worry about. It's worth noting as well, and this is kind of a stupid thing to bring up, but you got Clase on, I believe it was his Instagram story, flexing his jewelry, I think, and I can sort of double check on that one as well. It was his accomplishments, and he had a bunch of rings on his hand and such as well. He's got, all MLB, he's got all of these awards that, he's going on to his Instagram with to show. Kind of leads me to think, and this is again a little over analyzing with social media, I don't like doing it myself, but seems like he might be a little bit rattled. Something to note at least. I mean, again, you talk about the play on the field anyways, and that is sort of the initial concern as it is, but clearly, especially when you're in a closer, it's all about those mental games, and he seems to be losing that fight at this current moment. So that is how the Guardians end up being down in a position there. Yankees get the insurance run in the 9th inning, and ultimately, it, like I mentioned, Jhonkensy Noel, with the Guardians season seemingly up against a wall, it was Lane Thomas on second base. At the beginning of the 9th inning, or at least the bottom of, started with a double play that seemed like it was going to be detrimental at that point. Ramirez reaches on an error. Maybe there's a little crack for the Guardians to get there. Instead, Josh Naylor ends up grounding into that double play to make it no runners on, 2 outs. Seemed like it was over, but again, it was Lane Thomas doubling and then Jhonkensy Noel opening it up to send it to extra innings, and then David Fry, who has been massive for the Guardians in these playoffs, he comes up with the walk-off home run, and this is now all of a sudden a series, and it's a very interesting series at that as well, especially when you take into consideration, where things move on from here, because where the Yankees seemed like they were going to be able to pretty easily close this thing out. Instead, it's the late game dramatics, and the Guardians are now fully in this. A very interesting pitching matchup for Game 4 tonight, yet again in Cleveland. It is Luis Gil, who was a bit of a rookie sensation for the Yankees during the regular season, versus Gavin Williams. Neither one of these pitchers have pitched in the past few weeks. 2 younger players at that as well. So making in their postseason debuts these types of appearances, going to be very interesting to see how this one shakes out. Because, I mean, when you look at this from the Guardians' perspective, specifically looking at the starting pitching, last night was the first time that they had gotten at least 5 innings out of a starter the entire postseason up to this point, where it was Matthew Boyd able to get through that 5th. I believe he retired 10 straight on his way out. Maybe a little bit shaky at the start, but ultimately a very fine start for them, and able to turn it over to their bullpen, which, between Gaddis and Clase, we're seeing a little bit of shakiness there, which definitely does not bode well for the Guardians. But you look on the other side as well with the Yankees, you now have Weaver getting hit up a couple of these past 2 games. I believe it was a solo shot to J-Ram in the 9th inning of Game 2, and then In this one, he ends up letting Noel hit the game-tying home run in the 9th inning, and Clay Holmes coming in a closing situation. Obviously, Holmes a massively talented pitcher and everything, but a lot of the storyline with the Yankees and with Holmes this season is that he had sort of started to break mentally, and he was not able to do a good enough job in that closer role to the point where they shifted him to an earlier, more of a setup guy, I suppose, out of the bullpen throughout these playoffs. He comes in the 10th. Obviously, David Fry ends up taking him yard for the game there, but, now we're looking at a little bit of cracks in the Yankees bullpen, which had been so huge for them, specifically going back to that Royals series in the divisional series, that now, I don't know, it's been so reliant for the Yankees up to this point on Luke Weaver and Clay Holmes. It's not like the Yankees have been, extremely high usage with a number of their other relievers. I suppose Tim Hill is in that conversation as well, where he's at least gotten some more consistent looks for the Yankees. But really, both of these bullpens bleeding a little bit. And I don't know. I don't think that it necessarily favors either team over the other. They are both very much, reliant on their bullpen as well. So now we're going into a Game 4 matchup tonight where can't totally feel great, I don't think, about either of these starting pitchers. Both of the bullpens, like I mentioned, a little bit on the rocks. Should be a fascinating matchup. Just hoping to see some good ball, ultimately, in the ALCS at this point, because in the NLCS, seems like it's going to be a little bit of a quick work series, as the Dodgers have won 2 games 3 and 4 in blowout fashion as these past few days, where on Wednesday they ended up beating the Mets 8-0. Last night it was a 10-2 beatdown. 3 consecutive days of these teams playing. They're going to be beginning their matchup at 5:08 p.m. Eastern, and this is one of their big acquisitions in Jack Flaherty, having a chance to close this one out and get the Dodgers back to the World Series. And, I don't want to bury the Mets just yet, because they do seem to have this reputation now of course, making things interesting when you least expect it. They have this game at home. It's going to be David Peterson on the mound to face off against Flaherty. We'll see. I think that there's a chance that this Dodgers offense is just too much in its stride right now. And, you have Mookie Betts, who not only has broken out of his slump, there was that streak, I think, going back to last year where it was something like 20 consecutive plate appearances without a hit. And really, since that home run he hit in San Diego, and I think that was Game 3 of the divisional series, he's been lights out for them. He's making big plays for them. You have Shohei Ohtani as well, who hadn't even been terrific. There was that streak that Ohtani was going on of consecutive plate appearances with no runners on that he had not converted on. And now Ohtani, is just lighting the world on fire once again. He ends up scoring 4 of the Dodgers' 10 runs last night. He was incredible once again. I think that this Dodgers team is just primed for, they're the favorites for a reason as things currently stand. And, this whole rest versus rust debate that is in the MLB in terms of playoffs obviously can be a little bit of a hot topic that nobody can definitively, I don't think, make an answer to. But it seems like the Dodgers are going to have some time off. Potentially we'll see if the Mets make things interesting. Again, don't want to write them off fully, but this does feel like it's the Dodgers closing it out. If not tonight, maybe on Sunday, I think, is when the next game after that would be for them. It would be Sunday evening. So, we'll see, but the Dodgers in excellent position as things currently stand with their consecutive blowout win. So, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, what your World Series pick is as things currently stand. But we are now going to be shifting gears to the NFL, where last night we saw the Denver Broncos, coached under Sean Payton, return to New Orleans and dominate the New Orleans Saints. So we're going to be analyzing the play of both of the young quarterbacks in Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler, talking about how this game played out, and are the Broncos now legitimate playoff contenders as their defense continues to roll. So we're going to be diving into that, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I'll blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into last night's Thursday night football matchup between the Denver Broncos and the New Orleans Saints. Storyline of this game coming into it was Sean Payton making his return to New Orleans, and you saw a lot of the Saints fans in the stand. You had the SOS sign, you had paper bags at one point as well. Fans of New Orleans right now definitely not feeling great since Sean Payton left. Not that I think that it's entirely revolved around Payton, but definitely a little bit of a statement as to where the Saints are currently at. I don't think it's, full-blown directionless. I think that they have a lot of areas that they need to fill, of course. Number one being the quarterback. I know Derek Carr injured for this game as well. Spencer Rattler stepping in, who really wasn't great. I don't think that he was terrible necessarily, but this was an ugly game from the quarterback position on both sides as well. And I do want to shift the focus back towards the Denver Broncos, because they ultimately are the bigger story in terms of moving forward, the impact that they have on the NFL relative to the Saints. No offense, Saints fans. I feel like you would probably agree with that. Not that the division isn't at least somewhat still in play, but the Broncos are looking like a legitimate playoff team at this point. And like I mentioned, quarterback play was ugly on both sides. Bo Nix in this game really wasn't good. He was 16 of 26, 164 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Now, the athleticism with Bo Nix is always a given. He is able to be a threat running the ball, ultimately ran for 75. The Broncos as a whole, by the way, 225 yards on the ground. Pretty incredible there. Not something that I necessarily expected to be a huge weapon for them coming into this season, but we're starting to see Javonte Williams get a little bit more rhythm back after he had a pretty disappointing 2023 campaign. He's looking to be back on track. You have Jaleel McLaughlin as well coming in for a punch on a few of those occasions, and I really do think it's credit to that offensive line, which is one of the more underrated units in the league. That being said, though, the reason they won this game was because of the defense, as it really does continue to dominate. Allowed just 10 points to the Saints last night. You look at what the Broncos have been able to do as a whole. Only allowed more than 20 points once this season, and it was in that season opener against the Seahawks. So they seem to be cruising up to this point, and it's really been impressive the way that they have just kind of been able to capitalize on a situation here. No Pat Surtain, no problem in this game. Levi Wallace steps up, and he had a pretty solid game for himself. They're able to generate pressure. They finished with 6 sacks in this game. Very impressive. I think going back now, this is a few games. I know against Tampa Bay, we saw them, I believe, with 7 sacks in that game. Just want to double check, but yes, 7 sacks against the Buccaneers. They followed that game up as well against the Jets by getting home to Aaron Rodgers 5 times. So the Broncos just continue to send pressure and get home. And you have to credit Vance Joseph for the job that he has done on that side of the ball to be able to take what was a solid defense coming into the year. I don't mean to downplay the talent that they have on that roster, Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers, but certainly outside of Pat Surtain, not like it's a ton of, A-list defensive players, and yet that's how they're playing up to this point in the year. And it's been incredibly impressive, especially considering the fact they, I think coming into this year, their best linebacker, Alex Singleton, he's been on IR for them, and they have all of these different players stepping up for them. Talked about this in the preview yesterday, but Nick Bonito is somebody that I wasn't even really aware of all that much until I went back and watched the Chargers game from last week, and just in general looking at what he's been able to do so far this season. He's been a real difference maker for this Broncos defense as well, and it's something that I think that they can continue to lean on moving forward. I see no reason why this would really go away from them all of a sudden. Now, I think that there are still very clear limitations on offense. Like I mentioned, Bo Nix. The best thing you can say about him right now is that he is playing by making less mistakes. Now, he's definitely not flawless. We saw him last week with an interception against the Chargers. In this game, did a better job of protecting the football, which is kind of just what the Broncos need out of him at this point. I know that Sean Payton, offensive mastermind, he saw so much in Bo Nix coming into this season. Or, really going back to the draft, but then coming into this year, the thought that he could be the one to operate for them. I'm not ruling him out by any means. That, he can still be a fine quarterback in the NFL. I have my doubts, but I'm not, ready to write anybody off 6 weeks into or I guess now at this point it would be 7 weeks into a season, and, he's played all right football for them. But, he has the 5 turnovers to his name. He has, I think, probably limited upside, which is where I get so sketched out about, is he a franchise quarterback? He can be somebody that's good enough right now at the position to lead the Broncos to wins as long as he sort of plays within the system. And it's not like he's necessarily benefiting from a loaded offense as well around him. You look at the receivers that he has. Also, by the way, side note, so weird Courtland Sutton getting 0 targets last night, just for fantasy football owners out there who decided to start Courtland Sutton. I'm sorry for you. I thought that, he would have at least gotten a look, but that was not the case. Now, Bennett, I guess a little bit of a side benefit is that, it wasn't Courtland Sutton, but, somebody was out there making plays, and it was Troy Franklin, who a lot of people had it seemed like I was reading reports that, there were a lot of doubters in Troy Franklin, that there were some members within the Broncos organization that felt like they had maybe made a mistake prioritizing keeping Troy Franklin over Tim Patrick, who Patrick they ended up releasing. He signed with the Lions. He's having, a pretty solid season over there in Detroit. But Troy Franklin, it makes sense that he and Bo Nix have this repertoire going back to college, and they're able to build off of it. Now, I still don't know. I don't think that Franklin is a true number one threat, but I mean the speed is very clear with him as well, and he's somebody that I think is good to have in the building for Bo Nix at this point, where maybe they could have had a slightly better option for this year if they held on to Tim Patrick, but I don't know. I like Troy Franklin a lot. I think that he is at least becoming a serviceable weapon in the Broncos offense. And again, I think that there really is something to having some of those, connections between a quarterback and wide receiver that are rooted in a little bit of, I wouldn't specifically limit it to college, but just having the reps together is incredibly important. And, fine game for him. 5 catches for 50 yards. So, ultimately, the Broncos here, I want to talk about their playoff chances because they are very much in the thick of everything as of this point. You look across the AFC, and this is something that we've highlighted on a number of occasions, that I think for the most part right now, when you look at the hierarchy of the AFC, I think it's the 4 pretty clear division winners. The Chiefs, the Texans, the Ravens, and the Bills. I think that those are the 4 teams that, they do currently lead their divisions, and I think it's going to remain that way. If you're high on the Steelers possibly, or maybe the Jets, you could negotiate a little bit, but I really do think that those 4 teams are going to be able to close out their division. So that sort of makes for the 3 wildcard spots, what do they look like? Well, like we just mentioned, maybe the Steelers are in that conversation. Maybe you have the Jets if they're able to turn their season around, which I do think is very much still on the table, and they have a lot of time left to do so. Outside of that, though, and even with those 2 teams, I don't love either one of them. I can't imagine that I would be picking the Steelers or the Jets to win a playoff game, especially if they're on the road against any of these other teams that, I think it's very much open for them. And the Broncos now sitting at 4-3 feel like they have a little bit of the upper hand, considering the fact that nobody else has truly separated themselves. And you look at the schedule for the Broncos, there are a number of very winnable games ahead for them. Now, next week, they are at home against Carolina. That is, kind of goes without saying that should be a win for them. They then have their 2 most difficult games of the season at Baltimore week 9, at Kansas City in week 10. Those are, I would guess, as of this point, probable losses, but assuming that Carolina is a win as well, you're still looking at a 5-5 record through 10 weeks, and again, very much still in the mix of things. And you look at the remaining opponents at home against the Falcons, they have the Raiders, the Browns, the Colts. I guess on the road against the Chargers, not necessarily an easy game. We obviously just saw them lose this past week, but that's it's definitely on the schedule for what could be a difficult game. On the road against the Bengals as well, not an easy one by any means. But then they have the Chiefs in Week 18, where the Chiefs might not be playing for anything. I think that this could be pretty, I wouldn't say pretty confidently, but I very much think that this could be a 10-win team, because you're talking about, again, Falcons, Raiders, Browns, Colts, Chargers, Bengals, and probably a Chiefs team that doesn't really care. They just need to probably, out of that stretch, go at least 4-3, which I think is kind of right up their alley. They're not an excellent team by any means, but with that defense, and if we do see Bo Nix sort of get more comfortable as the season progresses as well, I don't think that there are 7 teams in the AFC that are realistically better than them. Now, if you disagree, let me know in the comments section. Again, it's not like I'm all in on the Broncos necessarily. I wouldn't be picking them to win a playoff game either. But at this point, I feel like the Broncos are a pretty safe bet to make the playoffs, at least in comparison with some of these other teams where, there's just a lot more unknowns as to what their identity really is. That's the thing that I think the Broncos do have, is understanding they're a team that's built off of their defense. If they can continue to improve on the run game that we saw last night, granted, against a Saints defense that isn't particularly good, but if they can, get that running game going, if Bo Nix can stay mistake-free, the Broncos have an excellent chance this year to, surpass expectations in Bo Nix's rookie season. And in the, Sean Payton, I guess his first season in full control. I don't know if it's not that he wasn't in control last year, but the whole Wilson thing as well just made for a very interesting dynamic. And Broncos have to be feeling pretty good about themselves coming out of this game. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're going to be looking ahead to the remainder of Week 7 in the NFL and be discussing some of the biggest storylines across the league, certain games that are marquee matchups, and some of the, again, underlying storylines that make for more big picture results. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be looking at some of these storylines in the NFL for the upcoming weekend slate. We are entering Week 7, getting close to that halfway through the season mark, at least worth noting there. And I want to talk about some of these storylines with this weekend in particular and how that sort of has a ripple effect on the remainder of the season. So a couple incredible games this upcoming weekend, highlighted by the Super Bowl rematch, is probably the storyline that plays the most. The Chiefs on the road against the 49ers. Both of these teams pretty well rested. You had the Chiefs coming off of a bye week. 49ers, not a bye week, but a little bit of an extra long week, as they played Thursday Night Football in Week 6, so they had that entire week off as well. Both of these teams probably coming in pretty well rested and pretty sharp. I think it's going to be obviously a Super Bowl rematch between the two teams that are probably still the favorites in their respective conference at this point. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this all shakes out. You have the 49ers, who are getting all of their skill position players back. Still no Christian McCaffrey for this week, but they've been kind of clicking these past couple weeks. The Chiefs, on the other hand, have lost some of their key skill position players in Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice. And last week, or 2 weeks ago now, in their last game, they didn't really seem to feel that impact whatsoever. We got a big Travis Kelce game. The running game with Kareem Hunt was still very effective. So both of these teams, I think, firing very well. You can make an argument that each of them right now are in those top 5 teams in the NFL. And again, probably the favorites in their respective conferences. So will be very interesting to see how this one shakes out. And in terms of who needs this game more, ultimately the 49ers need it in terms of divisional positioning, and that's ultimately what I think gives the 49ers a little bit of that extra mental edge. There is still the media storylines as well about the Chiefs. Can they win convincingly? Can they do it against, higher level competition? Can answer some of those questions. I personally feel like the Chiefs have kind of already done so, but there are still a lot of doubters based off of what has been a pretty weird, close, contested Chiefs start to the year. So that game, stocked with storylines in that one, but they're certainly not the only one. The Houston Texans against the Green Bay Packers. I think the Packers are a team that we highlighted earlier in the week that I think they might really be emerging as the favorite in the NFC. Now, not to surpass the 49ers just yet, but I think that they're on that level. I think they're extremely complete on both sides of the ball. I guess there's a little bit of a weakness at the line of scrimmage, probably, a situation there where they're going to be tested from Houston's defense, which has been playing very well up to this point in the season. You have a matchup between CJ Stroud and Jordan Love that should be a fascinating one in terms of these next generation quarterbacks, but the Packers, I think this is a game where if they are able to convincingly win, they are going to be making all of the headlines next week when we come back on the show next week. And, you look across network television, feel like there's going to be a lot of people on the Packers if they do end up winning this game. Like we mentioned earlier this week, we went in depth with the Packers that I do think that they are in consideration for being the team to beat in the NFC. Might have placed a little bit of a wager on the Packers to win the Super Bowl at plus 1,800. So this is a huge spot for them to really establish themselves as one of those teams in the NFL right now. But the Texans are looking to do the same thing on the other side as well. So as much as I can get excited about the Packers on one side of this thing, that's the Texans as well are sort of vying for that ability to call themselves one of those teams. They are, one of the best records in the AFC. They're very much in play for the 1 seed, home field advantage, all of that. So should be a fascinating one in that game. Another one of those top matchups as well is the Lions versus the Vikings. And I don't know, this game has the potential to be great. I am a little bit worried that injuries could have a huge deal in this. I talked about it already. Aiden Hutchinson, him being out, I do think is going to have a very real impact, specifically on the Lions secondary, where they're probably going to be forced to hold up in coverage for a little bit longer. Still, they've had their highs and lows up to this point in the year, and I do believe in the overall vision with the Lions, but there is a very real scenario that this secondary, they don't have a ton of experience alongside one another, and now that the ultimate game wrecker up front is gone for them, I think they're going to be under a little bit more of the microscope. Vikings getting Aaron Jones back in this game as well, which I've talked about multiple times on this show as well, that Aaron Jones is the underrated X factor to the way that this offense operates and the job that they're able to do. So I think that that's a big difference maker as well for the Vikings. We're not making any picks on this game, but when you talk about the overall hierarchy, especially with that NFC North, it's the NFC as a whole at this point. All 10 NFC North teams were in my top 10 yesterday when we did our power rankings, but this is where we can see one of these teams potentially start to separate, so should be a really interesting one to keep an eye on over there. Some other teams that I want to highlight as well. We'll stick in the NFC for now. The Seattle Seahawks, they this week are going on the road to Atlanta. The Seahawks are on a little bit of fraud watch, and could this be the game for them to sort of clear their name? They're 3-3 up to this point, so they're very much still in the mix of everything. But when you look at their resume of wins, it has not been very impressive as of right now. 2 of the 3 quarterbacks that they faced are no longer the starting quarterbacks. of their respective teams now, just a few weeks later. They also beat Bo Nix in his first career game. Bo Nix, also not exactly a stellar quarterback as well. So this is a game for the Seahawks where their defense needs to get right, I think, is one of the biggest thing, and a lot of that does have to do with injuries, but at this point in the season, everybody is dealing with injuries, and Mike Macdonald, he came here to change the defense, and I think that he is on great pace to do so, but this is where they sort of need to be able to step up. I've talked about it in the past. I think that Kirk Cousins is a very much different quarterback as of this point in his career when he is under pressure. So can Seattle manufacture that pressure up front will be a huge key to keep in mind with this game. And again, just in general for the Seahawks, if they end up losing this game, it's not the end of the world. They're very much still alive for making the playoffs, but this is where I think that they're very much due for this season to not spiral out of control for them. Atlanta is a talented but not stellar defense. This would be a good win for the Seahawks against a team that is very much also in the playoff hunt and a division hunt in the Falcons, that I think a Seattle win in this situation would go a very long way. They are currently 3-point underdogs in it at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So we'll see about that one. And really, I think one of the most important storylines in terms of the long-term picture with the NFL this upcoming season is the Cincinnati Bengals facing off against the Cleveland Browns. They're on the road. They're 5.5-point favorites against Cleveland, which, in theory, in a divisional game, I really don't love. I still don't love the line as a whole, but this is a situation where it's pretty much must win for the Bengals, where, they got out to this 0-3 start, this 1-4 start, and it was really slow out of the gates, but, they pick up a win last week against the against the Giants on Sunday Night Football, and they were able to have their defense finally step up. Now, a lot of that has to do with the Giants' offense on the other side, of course, but I do feel like the defense can at least continue to build on this momentum. They have a game this upcoming week against a Browns offense, which has failed to get anything going on the other side there. And the Bengals, they have to start to make a push here because, at this point, it's more than just win the games you're supposed to win. It is starting to, really establish yourselves, pass all of the eye tests as well along the way. Last week, I don't worry too significantly about the fact that their offense was a little bit lackluster against the Giants. I think it's far more about their defense looking good, that is the key to success. I still don't have concerns with Cincinnati's offense. Would like to see maybe a little bit more of a rushing attack, but I think that Chase Brown has sort of become the go-to guy in that Cincinnati backfield, and that's something to continue to monitor there. But this game against the Browns, again, in terms of Week 7 matchup, about as must-win as you can possibly have, and I feel like the Browns could maybe keep this thing close. We are not making a pick on this game either. I think that the line is very weird for the 2-4 Bengals to be 5.5-point favorites on the road in a divisional game. But, it's no excuses for the Bengals at this point. They have to come through on a week-to-week basis if they want to be able to put together this playoff run. And then final game that we're going to be discussing here, of course, is the New York Jets versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game is loaded with storylines. Both of these teams making, noise early on in this week, with the Jets trading for Devontae Adams, the Steelers making the decision to bench Justin Fields for Russell Wilson. Still don't think it's been officially confirmed yet that Wilson will start, but it sounds like that is going to be the case. Is that the right decision for the Steelers? I guess we'll sort of find out. I think that definitively we'll know with the Steelers. I give it a 2-week window here for Russell Wilson and this Steelers quarterbacking decision that they play against the Jets and the Giants, both games at home in these 2 consecutive weeks, and then it's a bye week. At this point, again, you can't really coach an NFL season like this. I do think that Tomlin had a little bit of wiggle room based off of the fact that the Steelers are 4-2, but it's not like Justin Fields has been entirely convincing. He's had a lot of great moments. If you have him in fantasy football, I'm sure you're pretty upset because he's definitely been a fantasy football performer, but there are some things actually on the field that haven't looked spectacular. So, Russell Wilson, I think at this point has a pretty short leash, and deservingly so. The Steelers were having success with Justin Fields. These next couple weeks are against some tough New York defenses, but neither one of these teams particularly elite. So this is going to be kind of make or break for Russell Wilson, the starting quarterback, period. That if he is going to continue to be able to be an NFL starting caliber quarterback, it's based off of this season, and really it's based off of these next couple weeks. So we will see with that one. But again, I think I like the slate a lot this upcoming weekend. I think it should be a very good set of games, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we're now going to be taking a deeper dive into some of these matchups in particular, and I will be handing out my 5 best bets against the spread. Up to this point in the season, we have done a pretty good job, all things considered. 29-1 through the first 6 weeks, another almost perfect week last week. So we are going to try and build off of this momentum. Again, I really like a lot of the games this upcoming weekend. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now going to be diving into our weekly segment, which we do on Fridays, handing out our top 5 best bets against the spread for the upcoming NFL weekend. Having a pretty good year up to this point with a record of 29-1. Last week we went 4-1. The loss came on trying to chase an underdog. I felt really bad about having 5 favorites and ultimately went after the Cardinals. That one ended up burning us, but overall did a pretty good job for ourselves. And I think that these are some pretty attainable spreads this upcoming weekend as well. So without further ado, we're going to be starting in the earliest game. We're going back to London. I don't usually love betting on the London games, but for whatever it's worth, we're 2 for 2 on these London games up to this point. And I think this game does look a little bit trappish between the Jaguars and the Patriots. The Jaguars being 6-point favorites. I do stand by the fact that the Jaguars should not be favored by that much against any team in the NFL. Now, I know that there is a very real travel element to this. The fact that the Jaguars were already in London last week and they don't have to deal with the jet lag or anything along those lines. But, for whatever it's worth, Patriots on the East Coast, it's not like it's an entirely unreasonable travel over there. And they're also getting a little bit healthier. I don't know if any part of this line has to do with the fact that Drake May was dealing with a knee injury during the course of the week. That potentially could have had an impact, but he has adamantly said that he's good to go, confirmed by the coaching staff as well. So May should be available for them. It appears that Ramondre Stevenson, according to his own quotes, that he should also be available for the Pats this upcoming weekend. I think that is a big difference maker. I know Ramondre has been a little bit hit or miss this year, specifically with the fumbles, and obviously a stinker in the Jets game. But he is an upgrade on that Patriots offense, and I think that 6 points is too many. The Jaguars defense has not been able to get stops all season long. The Patriots are not a good offense, but I do think that they're going to be able to move the ball. Jags also probably going to be able to have success against what is not a very good Patriots defense at this point. But again, I think that this is not a Patriots win, but I think it's a Patriots cover. And 6 points, again, too many for me. I understand the trap potential here, but we are rocking with the Patriots as underdogs this upcoming weekend. Moving on to the 1 o'clock slate, Houston Texans versus Green Bay Packers. If I haven't made it clear this week, I am very high on the Packers now. And I think that they are incredibly sound on both sides of the ball. Biggest concern was the lack of a kicker. Seems like they might have one now in Brandon McManus. We'll see there, but I think that the Packers are going to just be able to kind of tough this one out at home in Lambeau. The Texans have been rolling up to this point in the season as well for the most part, but they, in terms of wins, losses, when you look a little bit closer at what the Texans have done this season, they have had to win a lot of these games close. Now, Colts was a little bit of a backdoor cover situation in week 1, so I don't necessarily hold that against Houston. But you look at up until last week, all of their wins came in a one-score game, and it took, I wouldn't say luck necessarily, but it took a little bit of malpractice on these opposing teams to not be able to come out on top of them. Horrible coaching and quarterback play against the Bears. You look at way closer than it should have been against the Jaguars. The Bills had a meltdown down the stretch of that game as well. That the Texans are still very good, but this is where they really do have to prove themselves. I'm a lot more in on the Packers. I think we know exactly who they are. I think they are a great team. Jordan Love, yes, he needs to clean up a little bit in terms of the recklessness, but they're extremely talented. I think the Packers are going to be able to come into this game and sort of pick and choose which ways they want to dissect this Houston defense that it should be a great game. I think the Texans are very much in it, but I do think that the Packers win this game, and I think that 2.5 points will be enough for them. So we are taking Green Bay minus 2.5. Eagles versus the New York Giants. Division rivalry here. Neither one of these teams have looked particularly convincing up to this point. The Giants have probably even played above expectations up to this point in the year, but with the injuries that they're now dealing with, Andrew Thomas, their star left tackle, he is going to be out for the remainder of the season. Kayvon Thibodeau, their number one pass rusher, he is going to be out as well. The Eagles are in a situation where, Sirianni, I wouldn't say he gets fired if they lose this game, but he is walking on such thin ice up to this point. Players claim to like him and everything. They just barely escaped with a win against the Browns last week, which doesn't make me feel great about their chances necessarily. But I do think that the Eagles are a good team on paper. They have all of these weapons at their disposal. The fact that the Giants are a little bit shorthanded on the defensive side of the ball is enough for me to lay these 3 points for the Eagles on the road. Chiefs versus the 49ers, the Super Bowl matchup from last year. And this is a scary one to pick, given the fact that it is Andy Reid coming off a bye week with the Chiefs, for whatever it's worth as well. Hasn't been quite as dominant again off of the bye with the Chiefs, after he had gone something like, I was looking at these stats earlier today. I actually might have them somewhere around here. They were something like 14-1 when he was with the Eagles, and, not quite as great since coming over to the Chiefs here. The 49ers also had essentially a mini bye week. They played on Thursday Night Football in Week 6, and ultimately, I just think that the 49ers at this current point in time are a more well-rounded roster, where they just have more angles they can attack you with. They know this Chiefs team very well. number one key to the game is probably going to be Travis Kelce. Can he continue to produce? He did for them in the Super Bowl last year, and specifically it came after it was Dre Greenlaw going down with that injury. Oren Burks steps in, and it was pretty ugly from there for the 49ers. They feel like they are probably a little bit more well-equipped. Hopefully, no injuries on the table here, but I'm sure Fred Warner will be involved with Kelce. I think that Devondre Campbell has had a pretty solid season up to this point as well. That I think the Niners are going to be keyed in on Travis Kelce, going to be able to take him out, and we'll see what the rest of the offense is able to produce for the Chiefs. But, this is going to be a gritty and a close game. I do think that the 49ers are going to win, though, at home. So I am laying the 2 points with them in the Super Bowl rematch. And then final game here, we're going to Monday Night Football, the Baltimore Ravens and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you've been watching the show, I am not really sold on any NFC South team. The Buccaneers are having a very nice start to the season, but the reality of the situation is I don't think that they are that excellent of a team. They have some dominant wins so far that you do have to give them credit for, but I don't think that they are particularly great on either side of the ball. Weird situation going on with their running game where it's been a little bit improved. Last week it was Sean Tucker, I believe, was the undrafted free agent that sort of burst onto the scene for them. They were, playing around with Bucky Irving as well, who's had a pretty solid start to his season. Rashad White, believe dealing with an injury, maybe just out of the picture as a whole right now. I'm sure that it's probably more injury-based and that he will eventually be back. He's listed as questionable as things currently stand. But the Ravens, they are still one of the best run defenses in the NFL. You're going to make Baker Mayfield throw the ball. I could see 40-plus passing attempts for Baker, if not in the 50s. And the Ravens' secondary and passing defense has not been at the standard that I think it should be, and that could ultimately be a fatal flaw for Baltimore, but I think that they are just going to be able to have their way with this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, that they are going to establish the run early. I really don't think that the Bucs have a good enough defense to be able to shut them down. They have a number of big-name players, at least in that front seven, that I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for them necessarily, but I see them establishing the run early, and then from there as well. Not a huge fan of the secondary for Tampa Bay either. 3.5 points. I know a lot of the time they can be a little bit scary to take you off the scent. Want to get that under a field goal. Maybe you can buy a point or two, but I'm pretty comfortable with the Ravens just straight up at 3.5. I think that they're going to be able to win this game pretty convincingly. They are rolling right now, 4 straight wins for them. You can make an argument that they should be 5-1 if it weren't for a shoe size too big for Isaiah Likely. That's not really my MO of going that route. I just think that the Ravens are still very good. And, Tampa Bay, they're not a bad team by any means. I do think that they are very competitive. I like a lot of the players that they have. That being said, though, I anticipate that the Ravens are going to be able to sort of control this game in a way that makes Tampa Bay uncomfortable. And Baker Mayfield, we saw Gardner Minshew have a lot of success in the second half against the Ravens earlier in this season. Again, completion percentage-wise and everything, the Ravens have been susceptible in the pass game so far this season. It's going to take a little bit of the Baker Mayfield show to be able to lock this, make this game competitive, but I'm pretty comfortable in laying the 3.5 points with the Ravens. So, in recap here, starting at the top, in London, the New England Patriots going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 6 points is just too many. Patriots are going to be able to keep this thing competitive, if not win outright. I don't know if I'm betting that necessarily, but I do like the Patriots +6. Packers against Texans, I have Green Bay -2.5. Should be an excellent game, but honestly, I do feel like the Packers are the more well-rounded team up to this point. They've been a little bit more battle-tested. The Texans at this point, huge spot for them to be able to make a name for themselves as one of the top contenders in the AFC right now. So should be an excellent game. Risky one to bet on, but I am laying the 2.5 points with the Packers. Eagles, Giants, this is a situation where this has to be a get-right game for the Eagles. Otherwise, they are in serious trouble, and they might already just be in serious trouble. But with the Giants down their number one offensive lineman, down their number one pass rusher, I think that this is a situation where the Eagles are going to be able to take advantage, play, you would think, smart football, Nick Sirianni getting his act together. This has to be the spot for them if they're going to be competitive this season. I have the Eagles -3 against the Giants. 49ers versus the Chiefs, another one of these very close games. I have the 49ers avenging themselves. This feels like a game that, not that Andy Reid hasn't been, but I think that Shanahan probably has that extra little bit of motivation for this game. The 49ers are just that much more healthy. They're getting this game at home. I think that they ultimately win this game. 49ers -2. And then, of course, the Ravens -3.5 against the Buccaneers on the road for Monday Night Football. So let me know what your thoughts and your picks are for this upcoming weekend. We can maybe share some thoughts on whether or not I am on board. But we are going to be taking our final break here. And when we come back on the other side, going to be talking a little bit of NBA. We just looked at betting spreads for this upcoming weekend, and I was looking at the NBA with some of their player awards for this upcoming season, and something really stood out to me about the lines for Spurs sensation Victor Wembanyama. And I kind of wanted to just talk this thing out in terms of where are we with Wemby's career? Is this all just the prophecy fulfilling, or are we getting a little bit ahead of ourselves? So I want to dive into that and at least have the conversation there. But before we do so, we are going to take our final break of the show. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where I want to pivot here to the NBA. I just want to have a conversation here. I don't want this to be overly critical or come off as if I am not a fan of Spurs sensation Victor Wembanyama, but I think that there are some very interesting dialogues and everything that's going around with Wemby. So, of course, if you don't know, Wemby drafted number 1 by the Spurs last year, and he fully lived up to expectations in his rookie season. He was the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year, All-NBA First Team. He was Rookie of the Year. He, checked off all of the boxes offensively as well. We saw him sort of coming into his own defensively. I thought he got more comfortable as the year went on, but there are a couple things that just are rubbing me a little bit the wrong way about the Wembanyama coverage heading into this season. So, for starters, and this is not, anti-him, I think it's worth noting right now that Wembanyama has been ranked as a top 15 player by two of, the biggest NBA coverage conglomerates there are in the media, with ESPN and The Ringer both having him in it was 11th and 15th respectively with those companies headed into this season, which I really don't have a problem with. ESPN one, I mean, it gets a little bit closer there. We don't need to go through the entire rankings there because I think a lot of them it's kind of stupid in some cases to make these comparisons, but we all understand. Wembanyama, I understand, didn't win a ton of games last year, but he did everything that he possibly could have done in his surrounding situation, and he should be, on pace to be one of the greats if we are really, looking at it from a trajectory standpoint that way. I don't think we necessarily can, and, I think that it is fascinating the fact that he is such a heavy favorite for some of these upcoming awards. I was looking on DraftKings at player futures, and the first one is that Defensive Player of the Year. He is a minus 170 favorite right now, headed into the season. The next best is Chet Holmgren at plus 1,200. This is an 82-game NBA season. There are now restrictions. I think it's, off the top of my head, I'm blanking. It's 62 games, something like that you are required to play in order to be eligible for these types of awards. Wembanyama was very much reliable for them last year, played in 71 out of 82 games. I'm not worried about that. You see the pliability with this kid. I mean, the way that he's just able to, bounce back up after twisted ankles and such. I mean, it's incredible. It really is. You can tell that he's been taking very good care of his body and such. But having the next highest odds be over, 100 to 1 is insane to me, especially with Wembanyama, who is still on a Spurs team that should be improved this upcoming year. But, one of the biggest knocks on Wembanyama's Defensive Player of the Year resume last year was the fact that Spurs weren't particularly a great defense. Now, the on-off stats with him and the impact that he had on defense is, very eye-opening. I thought he had a great case to win Defensive Player of the Year. I was pretty impartial in terms of whether or not he was, robbed on it. I think Rudy Gobert was also very deserving, which is somehow now a hot take, but I think that, there wasn't any robbery involved there. But, I mean, should we just give him the award now? What are we doing here to the point where, Wemby could take steps back? It's not like he was this flawless player last year, and the Spurs were definitely far from flawless to the point where, I mean, it is mind-blowing to me how significant of a favorite Wembanyama is this upcoming season. And, I don't have any extremely strong thoughts on who the second best would be. I mean, Chet is plus 1,200. I look more at a Bam Adebayo at plus 1,400, Anthony Davis at plus 1,800. These are guys that have been in the league for years and have shown a consistent ability to lead their defenses to being, elite groups and them being at the center point of it. Where Wemby, again, it's not to take anything away from how incredible of a defender that he is, but I think it's insane that he is this much of a favorite. And then, I think it's insane, but also at the end of the day, whatever, I suppose I would pick him to win Defensive Player of the Year anyways coming into the season. Really what I have a problem with is the fact that, like I mentioned, Wemby is top 15 on both the Ringer and ESPN's top 100 lists, and he is the favorite for most improved player, which if he were to win this award, we've already sort of lost the plot in terms of what most improved players should be. But this would be just a tragedy in terms of what it used to be. And I don't know. I'm certainly not old. I've watched the NBA in the 2010s. Like, that's what I grew up on. That's when I was watching, Danny Granger win this award and, go from somebody who was, maybe a middle-of-the-pack role player and taking on a much more significant role, starting, making big shots and everything. I think that we've gotten it right a couple of these past couple of years. Lauri Markkanen, absolutely deserving in 2023. Julius Randle, maybe that and the Brandon Ingram ones were both in terms of just changing the, environments that they were in and the looks that they got. But, I think that we are sort of getting away from what it should be. Last year, Tyrese Maxey. Maxey was in, most improved player conversations 2 years prior when he averaged 17.5 points per game. In 2023, he averaged over 20 points per game. We knew he was good, and all of a sudden, he is most improved player because what? His stats went up across the board. He also didn't have Joel Embiid for half of the season, so he was fully the number one option. His efficiency went down. He just took more shots. I don't understand necessarily how you're the most improved player when you have a Kobe White as well in the NBA, who we didn't even know if he was a real rotation player, and he ends up being a very legitimate piece of the Chicago Bulls. I wouldn't call it a successful season necessarily, but he now looks like he could be a starting point guard for that Bulls franchise for the next handful of years. And nobody came into last season with those expectations. Everybody knew that Tyrese Maxey had all-star potential. And just because his stats took a little bit of an uptick across the board, I don't know. I think that most improved player has totally lost all significance. And the fact that Wembanyama, a player that was just ranked as the 11th best player in the NBA according to ESPN, is the favorite here. What are we doing? I think that it's just, I don't know. I have a real problem sometimes with NBA media. I think it is one of the shakier out of the four major sports in terms of just kind of the randomness and the narratives that get pushed and everything like that. And honestly, I think this sort of circles back to the Defensive Player of the Year award as well, is so many NBA fans felt like Wemby was robbed last year, and it's almost like, no matter what, he is going to be the Defensive Player of the Year in this season. Minus 170 coming into a year is just insanity to me. And I love Wemby. I really do. I enjoy watching him play and everything. I think that he has the potential to be the best player in the league. I am fully on board with the process there. But I just feel like we have gotten to such a bad point with, some of these awards and with these, it kind of feels like charity at some point where, and I love Bill Simmons. I'm a huge fan of his work and everything. And, he himself admitted that it was a mistake that in 2023, he ended up giving Joel Embiid the MVP vote, which I don't even think is a crazy take. It was that his reasoning was it feels right that it should be Giannis and Jokic and Embiid in a 5-year stretch, or however long it was, should each have MVPs in there. I don't know why the narratives in the NBA are so much more extreme than reality in a lot of these situations, that I just think it makes for pretty messy. I think that more casual fans, and I love the NBA. I'm all into the NBA, but, I have people in my life that are not a fan of the league because of some of the nonsense that goes on around the edges, and I think it's for stuff like this, where, a lot of these awards seemingly have less meaning behind them to some degree, and I don't know. At this point, maybe I'm just guy yelling at clouds here, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Should Wembanyama, really, where I want to start is, should Wembanyama be in consideration for most improved player of the year? What does he have to do in order to win it? At this point, he basically was a walking double-double last year. He was a walking double-double last year that led the NBA in blocks per game. I don't know how much more improved he could be from there, but let me know what your thoughts are. Overall, where are you at with Wembanyama and the Spurs, who I think are probably still going to be one of the bottom teams in the Western Conference. As much as Wemby's great, was a huge fan of them adding Chris Paul. I really like Stephon Castle. I think they have some young pieces as well, and Devin Vassell, and, we'll see about Keldon Johnson if he can ever turn it around. I think that he can. I don't think that last year was a good representation of what he is ultimately in the NBA. But again, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, as that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media for more exclusive short content. And we will be back on Monday afternoon, same time as always at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit.